about the reliability and validity of psychometric assessments. And I'm wondering, in terms of the employers that are represented here, have you conducted research into the validity? In other words, have you looked maybe at the performance of people who've been in the position for a number of years relative to their scores in psychometrics and seen a positive correlation between those two things?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we did a 10-year study from 2012 to 2023 across 2 generations and post-COVID, during and post-COVID. And with DISC, as you'd all know, I'm sure you're very familiar with it, you have your dominance, you have your influencing, your steadiness and your conscientiousness. And our ideal profile when I was in Irish Distillers, and that's the most recent example, and so I'll use that, would have been that we would look for people with high I because it was about personality, it was about its marketing, it's the drinks industry, so it was about people who loved people, and they are typically high Is. The next highest point we looked for was actually the D, the dominance, because these were people who were in not 9-to-5 roles. They were out trying to find, they're like entrepreneurs trying to build a brand in the market. So we needed people with drive and ambition, which is typically, you know, a top-line trait of a D. The next highest point we looked for was conscientiousness, because if you're a high D and a high I, then you want to make sure that you still get the job done, you know, because high Is like people and they'll say yes to everything. So you need that bit of a balance with conscientiousness so that they'll actually get the job done. And if they say they'll be at a meeting at 3 o'clock in Grangegorman, they'll actually be there. And then the lowest point for us on the ideal candidate was actually the S, the steadiness, because we wanted people who are very flexible, who could be in Lagos this year and could be in London next year, etc. So not too high on that. So what we looked at over the 10 years was we saw a trend around generations. So millennials were very high D and I, quite low on the S and the C, so very ambitious people who wanted to be CEO within a year of being within the company, if you remember back in those days. Whereas with the Centennials, we saw a shift to the S and the C, massive shift to S and C. And the research on Centennials coming into organizations told us that. So we were kind of prepared for it. We knew that they would want more steadiness. Because of the VUCA world that we all lived in, if you remember that pre-COVID, and then really became VUCA after during COVID, but that they wanted steadiness, they wanted to stay loyal to an employer if the employer gave them what they wanted, etc. So we knew it was coming, and that was going to be a challenge for us, because actually the markets that we were opening up into were markets where we needed people to be more D&I. So what we did then was we upweighted our training with the knowledge of the research and then the actual psychometrics, because the great thing about psychometrics is you have the data to back up what you're actually planning, if used in the correct way, and that's where the power is unlocked. So we then use it to make sure that our onboarding was adapted to that. So for example, if you're a high S and C, then something like, if I take an example of reporting, you're not going to have to worry too much. That person's very KPI driven. They're probably the person in their first week say, when will I get my KPIs? How's my performance managed? And they love reporting, etc. But if you're a high DI, and that's the predominant profile that we're seeing coming in, let's say in a cohort in a particular year, then they don't care about reporting. They just want to be out meeting people, making sales, or promoting the brand, creating ads, having the next collaboration with a street artist, whatever it is. So basically, psychometric trusts were really, really important in informing not just placement, but also onboarding. And what we saw was when we got that right, so the DIS, it was like a lazy Z, that's why I'm going like that, then those people, the research showed that they actually progressed quicker into senior roles within FMCG. The majority of them stay within FMCG. The majority of them stay within the drinks part of FMCG. After that, then it became the food part of FMCG. And when we looked at other profiles, like let's say the high S and C, that they tended to leave FMCG. And if they left, they went into an office-based role because they like steadiness and they like compliance. So we definitely saw a correlation over those 10 years, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Have any of you ever, oh, sorry, Sinead,
No, sorry, I was just going to say we're probably slightly different, well, not slightly different, very different, in the sense that we use it from a sifting basis. And because we use it on a sifting basis, I suppose we did look back at one stage to say, okay, is there any correlation in terms of the numerical ability and the verbal ability within that? And we have gone below the kind of recommended threshold on occasion, depending on whether or not the person had maybe done an internship with us and we knew how that person worked, or there are some exceptions we have made within that. And I suppose we didn't necessarily see strong correlations in terms of people's performance on that basis. But I suppose from our perspective, we take a view, you have to have some kind of a cutoff at that stage when you're talking about volume recruitment. So we recruit for typically kind of 10 to 15 graduates a year. We've had over 2,000 applications. So to be able to get through that point, then you do need to bring it down. But then it comes to the point of, for your candidates, trying to give them the sense, okay, well, prepare as well as you can to do those assessments on that day, but it is going to be a point of view in terms of how they approach that on the day in terms of their performance, because you'll see it coming through. Some people who are obviously highly intelligent going through and getting first class honours and masters in all these areas and scoring really low in terms of a verbal assessment, and that's just an indicator in terms of were they distracted, did they give it the time. So it's not going to be necessarily an indicator, but unfortunately we have to have some kind of a step in place. So I suppose what we would have seen in terms of people who make it through to the assessment centre stage are probably those students who are more focused in terms of the type of industry that they want to work in, understanding the company they want to work in as well, for the most part, where they've gone and they've given the commitment to be able to work through those stages. So I suppose just there are many, it is a very broad area in terms of psychometrics, and I suppose you've heard two very different approaches within that. So I say if you score below the threshold, for example, in numerical, and you get in, we're not saying, okay, that person did really poorly, we have to really upgrade them in terms of that aspect. It's really based on their individual performance when they come to the business, and then customize the development for them as needed. If they are going to a really commercial role, then what supports they need to be able to get in there. So it's a combination of different elements as they go through the selection process, but also in terms of how they are once they get into the business and how they perform.
Yeah, Alton.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. So before I left this morning, my wife said to me, "Don't be boring, please." So I've been studying individual differences for about 20 years. So the question on reliability and validity is a really important question, because up until about 1990, psychometric testing was weak, wasn't particularly scientific. In terms of personality testing, all that changed about 1990 with the emergence of the Big Five model. I won't go into too much detail, but it's a really important question, the reliability and validity, because there's lots of products available in the market. Some are good, some are useless, some are okay. But if you are going to be practicing, or if you are going to use it in your own company, you have to make sure, Claire will tell you as well, you have to use scientifically proven, reliable and valid measures of whatever it is you're measuring. So like what I would say that in terms of the psychometric testing is a tool to allow a company to predict performance of work. Right, just the way a CV is, an interview is, references are. We're trying to make a decision about a person. The single most powerful tool we have available to us in terms of predicting behavior at work is intelligence testing. It's the single most powerful thing we have. It's not perfect. It's not destiny. That's a really important thing as well. Psychometric testing isn't destiny. There's always, exceptions and things like that. But intelligence testing is the single most important thing we have. And after that, then you can look into specific personality traits like conscientiousness. Is a very, very powerful predictor of performance. But as everyone else in the panel said as well, there's lots of other factors at play as well, in terms of, like, you could be highly intelligent, you could have good cultural fit, have the right personality, but you can have a very poor relationship with your supervisor. You might get support from your colleagues. There could be stuff happening in your personal life. All these things impact performance at work. So that's a really important question, I think, in terms of reliability and validity. So psychometrics is really helpful, but it's limited. Like every other tool that we use, like CVs, interviews, they're limited as well. So I think that's a useful starting point to ask about reliability and validity. Yeah.
Thanks, Alton. Yeah.
I think I'm handing over to you now.
Yeah. I suppose, not to let you away there too quickly. Are there roles where psychometrics are not applicable?
So yeah, I think so. So there's different types of psychometric testing. Obviously, there's personality testing. Sorry, you're fine. So there's like personality testing, but obviously there's cognitive ability testing, or intelligence testing as we call it. So cognitive ability testing is only useful when the job has an intellectual requirement. For example, if your job is to build a rocket to go, you have to be very, very intelligent to do that. If your job is smashing rocks or lifting a heavy box, and lots of people do that, and there's nothing wrong with that work, you don't need to use psychometric testing to determine whether that person is a fit. You need to be physically strong and available. So those jobs where there's an intellectual component involved, then cognitive ability testing is very, very useful. But then there are also jobs then where certain personalities mightn't fit with particular industries, with particular organizations, with particular teams within a single organization. So there's so many factors at play in terms of trying to predict performance that it's hard to say conclusively one way or the other. But you are right. Some jobs don't lend themselves to the need for psychometric testing.
And just, I suppose, just to finish out that then, in terms of differences, what generational differences do you see Ultan, what's your opinion on that? Because I know Sinead had her
Yeah.
opinion a few minutes ago.
So it's interesting. So again, the research on generational differences, and if you don't research or any reading on this yourselves, so the research on generational differences at work is overstated. The evidence for differences between generations isn't as strong as we think it is. So we'd say, oh, Generation Z are very, very different to millennials. Well, actually, the research supporting that, or longitudinal data, actually on that is quite weak. Oftentimes the differences are age differences. Now, I'm not saying that you haven't found generational differences in your companies. Be so arrogant to be to say that you didn't find them, but and oftentimes there can be differences between a certain cohort. It might be down to the generation. It could be how they're socialized. It could be down to their own particular expectations. So there's so many factors to play to say conclusively. But just my general view on generational differences, it's often age differences. But I wouldn't say categorically that generational differences don't count. Of course, it might be the case.
Yeah, I suppose there are different perspectives.
Yeah.
Employers will have, their experiences and what they've seen their I suppose their teams and how they've developed over time.
But even in my job, I've noticed a difference between recent students coming into my classroom in compared to students coming in 10 years ago. So it could be me, probably is me, but it might. I don't know. Is it because that they're part of a different generation? I don't know what the answer is. Is it just age differences? Have they had different experiences? So it's hard to say. I keep saying conclusively. It's hard to say conclusively one way or the other.
Very good.
Yeah.
Maybe just a small point there, because I have a massive passion for generations and the multi-generational workplace. I could talk all day about it. But actually, I was talking to an academic in UCD yesterday and they said exact same thing. They must have been reading the same paper as you, but the exact same thing. But a very interesting discussion. And actually, where we landed was it wasn't about generation, it wasn't about ages, it was actually about life stage. Sometimes you meet people in their early 20s and they have an old head and young shoulders. And actually, for them, sometimes they can find it difficult to fit into the box that is centennial, because that's where they might fit because of their age. But actually, what they're looking for and their life stage might be different to their age or their generation. And that's where we landed. It's actually where you are in your life cycle, as opposed to your age and your actual generational set. So yeah, a little bit of research, maybe opportunity in that space.
Thank you. Claire, I just have a question. I suppose another